So I'm just going to start with a couple of housekeeping bits. Please stay muted throughout. It'll really help us out. Me and also some of my colleagues have some auditory sensitivity, and it's really helpful if we don't have kind of background noise. Please do feel free to use the chat, and thanks to the team for turning off those annoying pinging noises. So it's really helpful because we can't see all of you because we're not in a room together. It's really helpful to know how stuff's landing. You know, if it's new information, if it's stuff you agree with, if you don't agree, if you've got questions. It's really helpful for us to be able to see that in the chat. So let us know how you're finding what we're talking about and what you make of it all. We won't be responding to questions throughout. I'll take a note of as many as I can, but there will be some time, around half an hour at the end of the session, for us to answer some questions or to take comments from people. We have got another session on the 21st. It's going to be a repeat, so there isn't a need for you to come to both. But if you find this helpful or interesting, or you have a colleague who you think really needs to know about what we're talking about, let them know that they have another opportunity and share the invite with them, please. So I'm going to do some quick intros to me and colleagues who are going to be delivering the session today, and to let you know what we're talking about and why it's us that are talking about it. So I am Jill Corbin. I'm an NDTI associate and was the lead author on the NOTS Rocket Science report. Hopefully many of you have seen it and have maybe even read it, possibly, and maybe that's what's inspired you to come along today. I am autistic, though I only recently found it out. After it took me about 3 years of working with Anne Mehmet to realise it was a bit slow for the penny to drop. I had a hospital experience as a teenager as well, in the CAMHS hospital, though yeah, it wasn't recent experience. That was over 20 years ago now. Yeah, and I've learned a tremendous amount working with other autistic colleagues, one of whom is Anne Mehmet. Anne, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Jill. Pleasure to be here. Such an important piece of work, and absolutely delighted that it's been commissioned and is now available for us. I am indeed Anne Mehmet. I am autistic. I am an associate with NDTI and also with other organisations, and I work as a panellist on the care and treatment reviews for some of our fine young people and indeed younger adults. I do various bits of national and international consultancy around autism. I'm quite well known on Twitter, but we won't mention that here, and just really looking forward to today.
Great, thanks, Anne. And Charlie, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie. I am an autistic expert by experience. I was admitted to CAMHS inpatient back in 2015. Arguably a wholly unnecessary admission, but I'll talk about that more later. I work with the Black Country on their key worker pilot for young people with who are autistic and have mental health issues, and I also sit on CETRs as expert by experience for those two. And I also talk quite a lot about the fact that I have chronic illnesses and ADHD and dyspraxia alongside my autism, which kind of all impact each other and kind of impact my experience.
Thanks, Charlie. That's yeah, great to have you as part of our team talking about this. So those of you who have read the paper might recognise Charlie's name as one of the contributors as well. So we're really pleased to have both Anne and Charlie along involved in this session. So I'm just going to give a little bit, a really brief background to how we came to be writing this report. So the autism team at NDTI emerged because some of our experts by experience, our autistic experts by experience, physically couldn't get into hospital buildings because of the challenging sensory environment, and we got curious and wondered, you know, why is it that some of our autistic colleagues can't get into hospitals, and what might that be like then for autistic people who are who are there longer term, and is there anything that we could suggest that would improve the sensory environment and would improve conditions for autistic people who are in hospital? So we got a commission about 3 years ago to do some sensory environment reviews, and it has grown from there. So we've visited many hospitals, perhaps with some of you, I don't know. And we generally, what we do is we do a walk around and review the environment. And what we found was that there are some very common themes that we pick up. So there are some common issues, and many of them have very simple, straightforward, not very expensive solutions that we think will radically improve the sensory environment for autistic people, but also for other people. So we had a conversation with Peter, hello Peter, at the Mental Health Task Force, and Peter was really interested in supporting us to share the learning, and agreed to fund us to write up a summary of our learning, and we founded that in the experience of children, autistic children, young people who have had an inpatient stay. So it's, again, those of you who have read the report will see that it's really built around people's experience and people's comments and reflections on their time in hospital. So the Not Rocket Science title is a quote actually from someone else's research. Dr. Ruth Moyes did some research on autistic girls' experience of inclusion in schools. And we reference that in the report, and Daisy says it's not rocket science, just listen. So we're really delighted that you are here and that you're interested and that you are listening to the experience of autistic children and young people. And we'll do our best to share our learning around that. And if I could have the next slide, please. Lovely, thank you. So we had a fabulous, actually a few fabulous autistic artists who contributed some images to the paper, and the images that we're looking at the moment are done by Sam Chownahern. And the reason that I asked Sam to draw a canary is because I've heard autistic people referenced as kind of the canary in the mine. And that's a nod to the fact that generally autistic people have kind of additional sensory sensitivity, but that the things that we notice and pick up are generally issues for other people. They just don't know it yet. They just maybe haven't realised. So, sorry, I was distracted by somebody not being muted. I have muted them now. So, yeah, what we think is that many of the recommendations that we are making will be beneficial to other people, particularly those who maybe have some anxiety, particularly those who have mental health problems, which, you know, will be, or should at least be, everyone who's in the hospital. We've also there's a couple of bits of anecdotal research. So one was from 3 wards where they screened everyone who was admitted to hospital, and they found that 60% of those admitted were autistic. So, you know, very significant. Another hospital that I visited just last month does sensory screening on everyone admitted, and the OT there said that over 90% of admissions, this was a CAMHS hospital, over 90% of admissions have sensory sensitivity, and yet in the walk around their ward there was a lot of really significant background noise, a lot of lighting issues. So some really simple adjustments that they can make that will improve the sensory environment for people who are in hospital there. So we do, yeah, Emily puts it beautifully. So Emily says, I think the things that are useful for autistic people would be beneficial for everyone. Small changes would have stopped a lot of distress for a lot of people. It would really help to be able to move away from the noise and other people to calm down. So that's from Emily, who contributes to the report. So all of the stuff that we're talking about today is kind of founded in the experience of autistic people. And we're going to give, I say we, Anne is going to give us some background information about autism as a sensory processing difference. But do bear in mind that the kind of the hints and recommendations and the things that we're suggesting are likely to be beneficial for other people too, including the staff. So if I could move on to the next slide, and I'll hand over to you, Anne.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Jill. Okay, well, so much about autism, as we know from our academic and research studies elsewhere, has been found to be radically different from how it was first envisaged many years ago. Mostly, not exclusively, but mostly, we now know of autism as a social processing difference, and also as a sensory processing difference. And those two things combine to make life particularly challenging in a world that really doesn't understand our sensory needs that well, and doesn't understand the different ways in which we socialize. And we've got such fantastic research coming up on that. Donna Williams, very famous autistic lady, no longer with us, sadly, but such a beautiful quote here, saying right from the start, from the time someone came up with the word autism, the condition has been judged from the outside by its appearances and not from the inside according to how it's experienced. And this has been very strangely true. Nearly everything that people write down about autism is from them looking at us and just deciding why we're doing something without asking us, which is a really strange way to be. Obviously, I'm not saying everyone does. I'm sure that nearly all of you are being wonderful practitioners and working directly with people. But that was so much of the history of autism. And if we start looking at the way that autistic brains function, we can see some real and significant differences. And this is just one example in the photograph that we've got on the screen. This is from another famous autistic woman, Dr. Temple Grandin, who lent her brain's processing ability to this particular experiment. And what they did is they put her in a brain scanner. Her brain picture is on the left of this. And you can see it's a sort of a fuzzy picture of a brain, but it's in colour. It shows how much of her brain was operating when she was thinking about a social situation and trying to think how to explain that to people. And so just about the whole of her brain lit up. It's connecting with all sorts of different bits of the brain, the bits of the brain that think about pictures, the bits of the brain that think about language, those that think about the past, you know, what sort of visual images she could come up with from that. So just about everything is working, which gets pretty exhausting after a while if you think about it. And so what they did is they took her out of the brain scanner, put in another woman. This is a non-autistic woman. Her picture's on the right. Same principle, and they said, okay, let's start thinking about talking about a social situation. And that is the picture that they got from the bits of her brain that were working on that. That is very different, yeah? If you look at it, the non-autistic person appears to have almost a broadband connection for socializing. Really wide motorway, if you like. We'll come back to that analogy later. A motorway for dealing with social stuff in a non-autistic way. And so we've got very different ways for the brains to operate. When we're asked to socialize, we know it's going to be exhausting because the whole of our brain's having to get involved. When other people socialize, generalizing, of course, when other people socialize, it's much easier because they have that bit of their brain designed to socialize the non-autistic way. So this is why we have difficulties when we put people into situations and say, well, you can prove that you're well enough by socializing just like the non-autistic people. And as long as you can do that for an hour or two, we'll believe you're fixed. You can understand the hysteria that results because we're thinking, oh no, you know, this is going to be so hard, it's going to hurt so much. We need to reflect on what we're asking. So the next slide would be very useful. Well, I apologize for my voice, a little bit of a sore throat today. It's not COVID, I've checked. A sip of tea should do it. Sensory processing. I just love the illustrations on this. So sometimes I'm really taken with looking at those. We know there's a lot of sensors in the body. With autistic people, we tend to take in too much sensory information. So that's a great generalization, because everyone will have their own profile of senses that are hypersensitive or hyposensitive, or maybe somewhere in between. And that can even vary throughout life. So all the time it's a communication with people to say, what's bothering you? What are you finding easy? What will help? With touch, with taste, with sound, with smell, and with sight. And of course, we're also dealing with our own internal senses. So we're talking about proprioception, where are we in relation to everything else? Or interoception, what are the signals our body is giving us about, are we hungry? Are we thirsty? Are we tired? Hundreds and hundreds of different messages that allegedly arrive in your brain, and your brain just knows what to do with them, and it sorts them out, and it tells you if you're hungry or tired or overloaded. You're lucky people if your brain does that effectively, because with ours, we're taking in so much that it gets log jammed. We'll come back to that in a minute. And again, we've got another quote here, this one from Rebecca. I believe that achieving the correct sensory environment is essential when trying to treat autistic people with mental health problems. When this is not addressed, autistic people are less likely to respond or engage with treatment, as they are preoccupied with sensory imperfections. And it's important to say that here that we don't mean that we're just pedantic about it. It's absolutely overwhelming. Nothing we can do about it, because our brain is designed to take in this info, and we've made a world that is so busy and so noisy and so smelly that basically we've just pushed an awful lot of autistic people into not coping with it. And then what do? We put them in a hospital full of noise and smell and light and everything else and go, get better. It's amazing that any of them do, and it's nothing to do with the fine qualities of the staff, the actual practitioners around them. It's to do with the fact that they are just constantly overwhelmed. The next slide would be lovely, please. Here we come on to my fine son's Roundabout Theory. Chris is another one of our NDTI associates, and he's very well respected in his NHS work as well at the moment. He's also autistic, and he came up with this particular theory because he was helping to explain how his own brain works. And he said, well, just about everyone knows about roundabouts. You've all been on roads. You know that roundabouts are supposed to take in traffic, round the roundabout it goes, off it goes to somewhere else. If it's functioning well, everything keeps moving. And we've all been in roundabouts that have gridlocked. Too much happens at once. All of a sudden, there's just traffic everywhere. Nothing can move, nothing can come on, nothing can get off the roundabout. This is very much like the two processing systems we've got for autistic brains and non-autistic brains. Because the non-autistic brains tend to be better at processing information from lots of different roads. Oh, here comes some sensory stuff. Here comes some social stuff. Yay, okay, dealt with that, off it goes. That bit's irrelevant, doesn't matter, can ignore it, they can wait at the traffic lights. Dealing with this stuff, it's actually pretty effective at just dealing with specialist non-autistic priorities. Our brains are taking in the lot, everything, all the sensory stuff, all the social stuff, and it's thinking which bits are important. We don't know yet, because there might be more traffic coming on that will tell me if the other bits are important. So perhaps I need to pile some more cars onto the roundabout. Oh no, how do I process this? I really don't know, because now there's even more sensory coming in and even more social stuff coming in. Absolute gridlock. So we end up needing to clear that roundabout. And we do that by taking the sensory load down. We do it by taking the social load down. And we do it by engaging with our hobbies and interests, because those are our big motorways. Those are the things that allow us to clear those roads. They're really, really important for us. What do we know about what society has thought of autism? They thought that our specialist hobbies were obsessions that should be stopped. You mustn't do them. Oh, no, it's restricted, it's repetitive. No way, stop. The gridlock just continues, because without them, we can't clear those roads, if that makes sense. So those specialist things are so, so important. And again, we've got a very good quote here from someone who's saying, Emily, to have my needs met as an autistic person would have transformed my experience in hospital. The sensory input added to my emotional dysregulation. I couldn't engage with all the therapy on offer because of the added distress. Small changes would have made a big difference. And I think that's exactly right. So many of the young people that we're looking after in hospital settings need some way to get away from it, some way for the overload to just stop. So that's as much as I can say about that one for the moment. And I think we are then on to the next slide. Thank you. Charlie, over to you.
Thank you. I wanted to talk a bit about A&E, even if you're not working in A&E, or impact on what happens prior to admission and on the arrival state of young people. I didn't go from A&E straight to a unit. I had a couple of weeks in between, but its impacts are actually quite long lasting. And so if it can affect me like that with those couple of weeks, you can imagine that it would definitely impact those going straight from one place to another. A&E was really awful for me. The quote on the screen is my experience, so I won't kind of say all of it. But I think for me, one of the biggest parts to that is it's just constant noise. There's crying, there's all of these different things. There's people clattering about with different trolleys. There's just so much noise. And it's almost impossible to distract from that, especially if you go into A&E mid-crisis, which many of us do. So you wouldn't have your own stuff to support that, whether that be stim toys, headphones. Even for me, it was just the fact that I didn't have other clothes or toiletries. I think I literally turned up with like just a Tangle toy and that was it. And the clothes that I was already in. And so the sensory experience of A&E can be really overwhelming, and it is unlikely that we're able to regulate and mitigate those issues during that experience. And so it means that those arriving at inpatient could be frustrated or angry or unable to speak in a way that they might not be at other points in their admission. And it's also really worth remembering how many of us are not diagnosed until we are admitted. I was diagnosed about halfway through my inpatient experience, so reasonable adjustments and support wouldn't already be in place at that point. I think on the next one then. Yeah, and then I think talking a bit more about noise. It was the alarms on my unit that are the thing that I still talk about in relation to my admission. Even though it's been like 5 years, it's the thing that still impacts me today. Just like Emily, whose quote is on the screen, I had a lot of panic attacks or meltdowns just due to the alarms. And I actually spent huge amounts of time sat in the communal area, even though I was more comfy in my bedroom, because the alarm panel would kind of note that they were about to go off so I could prepare myself that little bit better. And a state of panic and just being on edge all the time is really difficult. It makes it so hard to engage with that recovery and any therapy they're asking you to do. And for around 4 years after my admission, I would still associate any alarms with the unit. It would still cause panic attacks. And as well as that, there's all the noise of the slamming doors, other young people clattering about with plates. You know, for many of us, our sensitivities mean that we even hear things like electricity in the walls, which is something I experience really strongly, and ultimately that would be exhausting alone, even without the additional elements.
Shall I add a little bit as well, Charlie?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's it's so clear. So in the conversations that we had with young people who'd had a hospital experience, predominantly people spoke first about the challenge of noise, and particularly of alarms. So the overriding concern that people had and their worry about a return to hospital, not exclusively, but very often it was about how distressing the alarms were. And alarms are intended to alarm, they're kind of the clues in the name. And for some people, and Jamie says it really well here, like, you're waiting for the next time that it will happen. So like there's this sense for some people of always being on edge. So autistic people often don't habituate, so we don't get used to noise or smell, we can't tune it out, and so every time an alarm goes, it is alarming. It sends that kind of kick of adrenaline through us. And for people who are already struggling either with other mental health stuff or already feeling a sensory overload, it's incredibly challenging, and for some people does send them into either shutdown or meltdown. The recommendation that we make in the well, I had a really exciting breakthrough in writing this report, was that we found a different solution, and we were delighted to be able to share a solution, which is silent alarms. So these are the alarm systems that work. They have two settings. One is on a bleeper system, and the second alarm is an auditory alarm. So the first alarm goes to staff who aren't working on OBS, they're not on the ward, and it bleeps and alerts staff that that kind of their support is required. And if it's kind of a real crisis situation and anyone who's available needs to attend, then there's the second alarm setting. And we have seen these put in a couple of places. So Birmingham used them, Pebble Lodge down in Bournemouth have just installed them. And the feedback that we have heard from young people where those alarms are used versus the other locations that they've stayed is really positive. So the second thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but the second thing, like relating to alarms, and this also links to like unexpected noise, so doorbells, the beeps of the doors, the slam of the doors, like you can just tweak and adjust the door closing mechanism or change staff practice. So there's an expectation that they wait and shut the door to with a hand, so they're not slamming. My colleague Richard describes the slamming of doors in hospitals when we're there as like shotguns going off, like it's coming, but you don't know when, and it's going to be a shock every time. So it really is incredibly physically stressful to be in those locations with a lot of noise. Yeah, and again, Jamie says, I felt distressed. Like it really is incredibly challenging. So the other thing that we have heard done, so we've heard the use of silent alarms, we've heard people being involved in fire alarm testing. So we know this has to happen, and we're going to ask for your input and support and control. Like, you're going to be the person who turns it off, you're going to be the person who times it. We're waiting for these to light up, and this is what's going to happen. So people are involved and aware and have a sense of ownership and control, and that can be really helpful for us. And the other thing that we have seen is some places are starting to write this into care plans. So if somebody does, for example, have an auditory sensitivity, then there is an expectation that if an alarm does go off, or when an alarm does go off, that support will be provided. So there will be a check-in from staff. People will be offered noise cancelling headphones. If somebody finds kind of a weighted blanket and that kind of sense of protection and the weight on them helpful. So understanding the need, hearing that it is challenging for people rather than dismissing it, and responding in a way that's supportive and helps people to regulate can all be really helpful. I think I've said enough about that, so I'll move on to the next slide, please. And this is one for you, Anne, I think.
Thank you, yes. Transitions and how we process light, how we use our eyes to be able to detect what's in front of us and what's around us. And I've done a couple of photos here just to try to help you understand. Though, of course, since these are static photos, you can't get the whole effect. Let's look at the top couple of photos here. This was a doorway, and you can see there's pattern tiles. Left-hand photo there, pattern tiles, and then you can see there's a spiral staircase going up. Except that's not how I see it. Because when I look at it, if I am in any way overwhelmed, or if there is fluorescent light overhead, for me, it looks like the one on the right. I have no idea. I don't know what that is. Is it a doorway? Are those stairs? What? Pass. And then someone will say, right, hurry on, in you go. I go, in what? Yeah, what is it? I have no idea. I'm not going in there. No way am I going in there. You're joking. And you can start feeling quite anxious because you're thinking, I need processing time. I do not know what I'm looking at here. You know, am I going to drop into some kind of black hole if I step forwards? You know, am I going to slam up against something? What is it? So many of the transition difficulties we have are around changes in sensory environment between one place and another. They are young people, young adults, looking at a particular situation, hearing it, smelling it maybe, and thinking, oh my goodness, you know, do I have enough room on my brain's roundabout to cope with whatever this is? What is it? Sometimes it can help if people just go in first and we can watch what they're doing. Because if they've gone in and they haven't dropped into a black hole, that's good. That probably means it's safe for us to go in there. Following on can be really useful. And we'll see autistic young people in particular picking a carer who will enable that following, who will act almost as a guide dog to help them through sensory environments. What do the old traditional methods tell us to do? Oh, we mustn't let them form a relationship with any particular carer. No, 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 that's attention seeking or something. We must make sure that their carers change all the time, otherwise they'll become rigid and repetitive. We've had such strange myths. Always my go-to is the sensory side. What is it they're sensing? How can I help? How can I let them just be and explain? Unless it's an emergency, in which case, well, hey, off we go. We've had real problems as well. I work on cases for the NHS, and obviously I will anonymise this in all sorts of ways, but there was one particular young woman who was in a centre somewhere towards the north of the region, and they were in a particular room and the team wanted them to move to another particular room. And like this, they were terrified. They went, oh no, what can I don't know how to do this. This is too fast. I can't process it in time. And the team immediately went to what I call the standard approaches of, is this attention seeking? Is this controlling? Is this you just having a meltdown because you want to not do it and control our day for us? And they ended up going into full restraint with that young person and caused injury to them. None of that was necessary. It wasn't any of the reason they were doing it. And so if only they'd understood that sensory need, that processing need, it would have all ended very differently, I think. So this is really important for the safety and well-being of those in our care. The bottom photos there as well I've shown now because the left-hand one probably how people would see a social scene. The right-hand one there is how I see it under fluorescent light, except it's also flickering like a strobe light. Absolutely dazzling. Not everyone has that effect, but some will have that effect from LED lighting if it's really bright spotlights. So you can see how challenging it is because people will go, well, into that room you go, let's do some therapy. And you're thinking, oh, it's like being in a disco. You know, how are you standing in this space? Thinking about where you can go, where the lighting is perhaps natural light, perhaps quite low, controllable light, opening that dialogue about what would happen if the lighting was different with people. and sometimes just trying it. So I just switch the lights off and go, there you go, is that better? And they'll go, oh, so it is. Yeah. They hadn't realised. Lots of young people just don't realise their sensory experiences. The next slide, please.
Okay, this is one for me. Thank you.
I think it is. Thank you.
So just adding as well on what Anne was saying there about transitions, one of the really positive things that we see in a lot of locations, though not everywhere, is glass panels indoors or next to doors. So being able to see between spaces, being able to predict what's coming up, being able to see through who's there, what's it like, what am I walking into, can really ease transition. So we still hear from a lot of locations that they're finding like young people getting stuck at entrances and exits and not managing like to transition between spaces, and you know, often that's about not knowing what it is that we're walking into. And again, a lot of locations have very bright but changing light levels, and it's really challenging. So I don't have any kind of visual sensitivity myself, but have colleagues who are really like very significantly challenged by walking from one room to another, because often those kind of corridor spaces have no natural light or little natural light, have very bright overhead lights, like dazzlingly bright and much lighter than the previous space. Often have hard surfaces, and so there's like a glare reflection thing that happens, and it's baffling how difficult, like it's like being under a floodlight. And it's interesting, like walking around with staff teams, I think a lot of the staff seem to have like habituated or got used to it, but when we point it out, like they are struck by how bright the lights are in some locations. So another thing that we see, which again puzzles me, is like lights on walls. But again, really bright light, you can see the bulb, and it's kind of often at head height. And again, it's absolutely blinding. So lighting is the second biggest issue that we heard from young people who contributed to the report. And a good quote from Jamie there, the bright lights in hospital were overwhelming. So I have a couple of colleagues who support with sensory environment reviews, and within 90 minutes to 2 hours of being in difficult lighting conditions, they're starting to go non-verbal. They stop being able to move through the space. They need to be prompted and sometimes guided out of the space, because that like it's a mix of the whole sensory environment, but particularly lighting. And the thing, so again, kind of picking up on Chris's roundabout theory, the thing that Chris would say is what happens is like the light is adding cars to the roundabout, but it's jumping the queue. So the light is like just jumping to the front of the queue and pushing everything else, all of these other cars, all of this other processing, all of my words are like 20 cars back, because all I can think about is the light and the intense glare. So fluorescent lights are notoriously difficult for autistic people. Many of us, thankfully not me, I'm pleased and relieved to say not me, but many autistic people struggle with the flicker of fluorescent. It's a light of two halves, and one of the halves lights up. And many of us can't see it, but a number of autistic people can. Really common in inpatient and in all hospital environments, but also in supermarkets, also in schools, is the use of fluorescent light. So what we're seeing now, which I'm kind of excited about but also worried about, is there is a zero carbon. So fluorescents are going to be phased out by 2023. I think they're going to stop being used as part of kind of the climate initiatives. We have a strong preference, we autistic people have a strong preference for tungsten lights, so halogen and tungsten lights, but they are unfortunately being phased out from September this year, unless we can get a medical exemption. So what we're seeing increasingly is LED lights being used. And there's a zero carbon initiative at the moment, and there's funding available through NHS estates, I think, to support LEDs being put in. But there's 2 hospital visits we've done recently. One exclusively had LED lights and one had a mix of fluorescent and LEDs. And I was shocked and alarmed to see that my colleagues were, I would say, more adversely affected by the LEDs than they were from fluorescents. And I think that what we're seeing is that there isn't really good guidance or standards about what good quality LED lighting looks like. So generally they are very bright. Generally they are not diffused, so it's kind of a direct light source. Generally they are white rather than warm lights. And actually, like, LEDs work on a totally different light spectrum than other lights. So often they are automatic rather than a light that you can switch off. Yeah, so there's some real challenges with it, and Anne and some of the colleagues and I are gonna try and develop some clearer guidance around good quality LEDs. But it's and we've included some guidance in the report around what we think good looks like. But I would encourage you to think about like good natural lighting as far as possible. So like, you know, windows and that kind of thing, really helpful. Like, natural light is much easier. Switching lights off, as Anne suggested, really helpful. Like, even if it means that we're sitting in slightly the dark, like for a lot of autistic people, it will be significantly more comfortable and you will get significantly better engagement, I would suggest. Diffused lights, so thinking about how they can be covered, like, even like, you know, the kind of the glass covering, even if that could be kind of a slightly opaque glass so that the glare isn't as bright, can be really helpful. Often what we see is lights on timers, so especially in bathrooms, en suites, they're often like on a 5-minute timer, and so the glare is coming into the bedroom for like five minutes after you've used the space. And as far as possible, thinking about like flexible lighting options. So you know, if it's clinically necessary to have very bright lights, then you know, is there a side light alternative or a dimmable alternative that would give more flexibility for when it isn't clinically necessary? Just a note as well on dimmable lights, I know that they are you know, that they're kind of seen as a solution for a lot of autistic people. As the lights are dimmed, they flicker and hum. And there's something around the kind of the quality of the component parts, but also LEDs are, this is my probably not very good understanding of it, but I think of them as being like slightly, they're not radioactive, but they have a kind of a half-life in a similar way to radioactive materials. That means that they have quite a high fail rate, and as they get old, the quality is impaired. So that, yeah, there's quite a lot of thinking to do around LEDs, but I think flexible lighting solutions, being able to turn them off, having access to natural light, and having alternatives are all really helpful. Charlie, can I ask you to kind of just share some of your experience on lighting?
Yeah, I think for me, the worst part of lighting was always at night. In my unit, they kept the lights on in the corridors, and all of the rooms had kind of like the doors and then a window at the top, that we see quite often. So there was always light coming in, and being on 15-minute checks, it meant that they were constantly coming in and out, and that meant more light was coming in, and then they were shutting the door again, and less light was coming in. And I would just wake up every time. You know, especially in the first few weeks. I think I did get a bit more used to it by the end, but in the first few weeks I was just on alert all the time because I knew that there was going to be light streaming in every 15 minutes. And being that at alert means that the sleep quality is so awful. And for me, I find that my sensory overload is so much worse when I'm tired, because there's just so much that my body is dealing with. So it just means that that constant light just really impacted me, especially at night time.
Thanks, Charlie. So there's some kind of pretty simple things that we suggest around this. So good quality curtains that don't let light in, really helpful. and missing in so many places. What we see in a lot of places as well is is internal windows. So, for example, from a corridor onto a lounge, and corridors are often very, very brightly lit. And so, like, having, you know, sometimes it's really important for staff to be able to see into a room, but, you know, sometimes it doesn't need to be a whole wall of windows. So having options where people could shut out some of that internal light would be really, really helpful. So there's quite a few kind of hints and tips like that in the report. I think we'll do maybe one more slide, Anne, and then we'll go to a break. So we are going to have a 10-minute break, but let's do one more slide before we do that.
Ah, yes, dining rooms and the taste of food, or indeed the smell of food, or the texture of food. So many of our young people have difficulties with eating. And of course, we have a variety of specialist units that are there to try to enable some better outcomes for them. But so often the place they are asked to eat is a nightmare. If they're autistic, it is just a living nightmare of different sensory input. And you have everything going on in there. I mean, it's pretty much the busiest, the noisiest, the smelliest place in most of the hospital and residential units that we see. You've got all the clattering of stuff as people use pots and pans and crockery and cutlery. You have got all of the fridges and freezers and ovens and ventilators and extractors within the kitchen unit itself. You have got all the furniture being scraped across the floor and scraped back again. The furniture itself, although you can see here someone's put some padded furniture in, hurrah, most of it isn't. In many units, it's just a very solid thing without even arms. As I think we'll hear later as well, so many autistic people have hypermobility as a comorbidity. And they really, really struggle to even sit on the chairs or get themselves up off the chairs. But that's where they're expected to eat, in this sensory heck, to use the most polite way I can think of to describe it. So there they are, in pain from potentially their body and pain from the lighting and the soundscape. Someone then hands them freezing cold cutlery, which digs into their hands to try to eat with. And they're giving them a plate of, they don't even know what, because they can barely focus on it in this lot. And they're told to then eat it. The taste of it might be overwhelming. The texture of it might be overwhelming. The smell of it might be overwhelming. All of that added to their own situations. And they're surrounded by other people eating different foods with different smells arriving at them. How they cope, I do not know. One of the top things we say to people is please offer choice. Please, where you can, offer alternatives for where people can go. Please think about comfortable seating with arms. Please think about comfortable cutlery where that's safe, because you can get some lovely soft feel cutlery. I use it myself. Very difficult to stop all of the clattering and clanging, but if people can move away from it or use things like noise cancelling headphones, sunglasses, anything that can take that down, we'll talk more about those later, it really helps. And also acoustic flooring really helps as well. A lot of these places echo and echo, and then you can't hear, you really can't. Many autistic people can only hear one clear conversation at a time in a space. The moment there's a competing conversation, we hear both. If there's 5 or 6 competing conversations, we'll hear every one of those at once. Can you imagine being a young person in a standard canteen trying to eat? I think, you know, for this, Charlie would be delighted to contribute as well, not least because of the fantastic quote there. So Charlie, do you want to take over from this one?
Yeah, I had a myriad of issues eating as an inpatient. You know, the first of those was the food itself. You can see on the screen my quote about jacket potatoes, which is what I became known for when I was an inpatient, quite funnily. You know, my sensory issues have always meant I've had a limited diet, primarily based in texture, but also taste, smell. You know, even now I basically live off pasta and corn nuggets, and normally that's fine. But when you're being told to pick off a specific menu, that becomes really difficult. You know, there were days where I was eating jacket potatoes for both main meals because there wasn't anything else there, and sometimes they were plain because they wouldn't even divert from tuna, and it was so rigid. When I'm under stress, my eating gets a lot worse, and because the meal times were so absolutely set in stone, it meant if I was anxious and didn't feel able to eat in that moment, I just wouldn't get to eat. So there were a lot of days where I'd just go to bed hungry instead. The environment of the dining room is always really difficult. I have quite severe misophonia as part of my sensory issues, so hearing people eat is almost torturous. And the small space with so much echo made that so inescapable. And like Anne said, I couldn't cope with all of the extra noise of electricity, conversations, smells. As someone with dyspraxia as a comorbidity, which I believe is really, really common, I need thick-handled cutlery as well. And yeah, I guess for me, it's a question of, does everyone need to be eating at the same time? How do we make adjustments to meal times to make them less stressful, and how can we differently accommodate diets? Because it is such a problem, like trying to engage in therapies when all you've eaten is jacket potatoes. It sounds funny, but it's not. It was extremely difficult. Yeah, I think it's just about, there's a lot of accommodations that could be made there, but I think it just makes life easier to not do that. But yeah.
Thanks, Charlie. So the report, again, I'll keep kind of signposting us to that. It includes some very definite recommendations around food and meal times, and also the dining space. So our report initially, we had aimed to make it only about the physical environment, and what we continue to hear from people, and Charlie, thank you for being one of those, is that like the most unpredictable thing in any physical environment is other people, and the predictability and staff engagement and staff attitude is so important, and the kind of the potential flexibility in approach that staff could have that would make an unworkable situation workable for autistic people is really significant. So in relation to food, like, we encourage wherever possible for people to be supported to eat earlier, later, and ideally to be able to take food away, to stuff like putting felt on the feet of the chairs, so the chairs don't make a noise as they're moved, makes a really significant difference. Changing the lighting, turning the radio off, enabling people to have stuff that will, I'm doing this, like headphones, that will help them to manage the sensory environment, are all really, really helpful. In the left photo there, we can see that it's really often is a canteen style kitchen. And like generally when we go into hospitals, we don't recommend big structural changes, but one of the big structural changes that we do recommend is a movement away from canteen style kitchens. Like, what happens is that all of the noise and the smells from the kitchen floods the dining room and is overwhelming. Like, it's so noisy. You know, in this photo, we can also see a microwave, and we know how noisy they are, and a fridge which hums. I mean, I have to close both doors between my kitchen and bedroom so I can sleep at night, because otherwise the fridge humming will keep me awake. Like, so that background noise that a lot of neurotypical people wouldn't notice is adding like so many cars for us autistic folk. And then you add in the noise of chairs and the lights and all of the other stuff that Anne's already mentioned. It's really overwhelming. So again, small changes that we can make, like the felt feet for the bottom of chairs, are really, like, they're really cheap and easy to do and make such a difference. Like, some of these things we can do immediately at very low cost, and it'll really make a good difference. Anne, I think this is one for you. Should I hand over to you?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think you're right. Touch, and in particular, the problems of hygiene, both sleep hygiene and personal hygiene. So many autistic people also have significant problems with touch. Some are hyposensitive to touch and really, really appreciate, very tight clothing, very tight shoes, very, sort of big things wrapped around them in order to get some sensory feedback. An awful lot of others will find the lightest touch is better for them. Some will find very light touch to be like an electric shock, very individual. But round us is everything we're touching all the time. We're always touching the floor, or nearly always. Think about feet. Chris talks a lot about this, my son. The perils of socks in particular. And many autistic people find their lives are completely transformed once they have found the right socks and the right shoes. And they've never realised how many of their roads' roundabouts are just being absolutely chock-a-block jammed with traffic from, ow, my feet hurt. Strange but true. But in hospitals, I mean, you imagine going through a bathroom in a standard hospital. You've got the glaring light, you've got all the smells of other people's stuff that was beforehand. You've got an impression like pins and needles from a shower. You've got all the noise and the smells and everything else from a bubbly bath. The loos, oh my word, Think about the cleaning products, think about whoever was in there last and what odours they have left behind them. The whole thing is a nightmare, and a lot of our young people can't engage with it, not because they like being filthy. Well, okay, if they're teenagers, they might. I've brought one up, you can never tell. But generally, it's a genuine problem that they cannot engage with the stuff. They're desperate to find even a towel that they can use that does not feel like wiping themselves down with sandpaper. And of course, everything has to be hygienic in a hospital. We have to think carefully about how we're processing stuff. But if they can bring in their own, for example, high thread Egyptian cotton towel, if they can afford such a thing, that can make such a difference. Duvet covers, pillows, the bed itself. I challenge most people to lie down on a bed and actually analyse what it is they're feeling, because you're probably very used to this. But for me, quite often, the bedding is like bobbled. The whole thing is like one sensory nightmare. The pillows, if you move on a pillow, it rustles. That's the soundscape, but also the whole texture of it changes as you change. You think, oh my word, what's going on here? I daren't move in case something else happens. The weight of the duvet can make a difference. The carpet on the floor. I've been into a few centres recently where the flooring has been hospital standard, if you know what I mean, that very scrubbable, almost sparkly surface you get in some of the old hospitals, on their bedroom floor. So in the middle of the night, they're getting out to go to the loo, and they've got this freezing cold, horrid floor underneath them. Nightmare, absolute nightmare, unless they can find the right slippers in time. Also, temperature of the room, that can make a huge difference. Bedclothes, are they allowed their own bedclothes or their own bedding? Some cases, of course, they can't if it's a security issue. But some of the anti-rip, the safety clothing they're given, I do not know how they survive it. I've actually, I've been given some of this to hold and consider. I couldn't wear it. I would be in just about permanent shutdown if I was put into that. But we're expecting somehow for people to be able to get themselves out of a bad situation into a better one whilst wearing it. We need to rethink some of the designs and really work with manufacturers as a whole, NHS, to come up with materials that are both safe and wearable, I think. Hello, so we've got a bit of background interference there from someone. And also think about sleep hygiene really carefully, because very few autistic people sleep well. Most of us are awake at least part of the night. And if you have that regime where, as Charlie was saying earlier, you're being woken up every 15 minutes to see if you're okay, pretty soon you're not okay because you're being woken up every 15 minutes. We need to rethink the ways in which we're engaging with that, and whether that is through the use of carefully consensual camera systems where it's just localized, whether it's a mirror in the corner of the room so staff can look slightly indirectly. Whatever the system is, desperately, desperately in need of sleep. And you think about also keys jangling all the way down the hallway, footsteps, thud, 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 all the way down the hallway. Back goes the little looking hatch, back it goes again. Away go the footsteps, thud, 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 thud. Away goes the keys, jangle, 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 jangle. 15 minutes, oh, it comes back again. Can you imagine? And then in the morning, of course, the young person is so exhausted they can't cope. And people will think that's autism. And it isn't. What they're looking at a lot of the time is sheer exhaustion. We can do so much to help with this. So yeah, that's just some ideas around touch. Thank you. And then I think if we have the next slide, that's probably also me. Smells, talked about this a little bit already, thank goodness. Toilets, ooh, especially when there's competing smells from other parts of the building, like the canteen. It really helps if people can swap to no smell. There's so many products out there that do not have a very strong smell, and we can put a good deal of thought into this. A colleague of mine I used to work with used to have her own scarf with her where that was safe to do so. And she would have her favourite perfume on it. So if she was overwhelmed, it's something she could put to her face and smell that instead of whatever the smell was around her. So that can be a solution as well. But mostly it's just a question of finding zero smell products. And staff being aware of this too, because so many staff arrive not realising what they smell of. They smell of perfume and aftershave and toothpaste and hair products and clothing fresheners. It's like a walking chemical bath. And you put a lot of staff in one room because some people are on 5-to-1, 10-to-1 particular treatment plans. Wow. Just imagine. So yeah, lots we can do also to help around the smells, the smellscape for people. Thank you very much. I think it's on to the next slide.
Very good, thank you. I think that's one for me. So we've spoken about this a little bit as we've been talking through other things. I'm going to start with Emily's quote. To have my needs met as an autistic person would have transformed my experience in hospital. The sensory input added to my emotional dysregulation. I couldn't engage with all of the therapy on offer because of the added distress. Small changes would have made a big difference. So we've spoken about some of the kind of physical, environmental approach changes that will help to reduce the sensory load. So often what we're doing with our recommendations is like trying to neutralise the sensory environment so that there's less sensory input. We've just been trying to, as Chris would say, trying to take cars off the roads. Sometimes there are physical changes that will do that, and sometimes it's not possible, or it's not possible in one go, or people have slightly different needs. And there are individual adaptations that can be really, really beneficial to people, like remarkably beneficial. So noise cancelling headphones. I'm very Anne is modelling wonderfully. Thank you, Anne. So noise cancelling headphones and also sunglasses. And these they give control to the person. I think they also like really beautifully hear and recognise and value what the person is telling us. So many autistic people, like often we don't know what our own sensory needs are. We don't know that our sensory needs are different from anyone else's, and we are used to being told that we're making it up, we're making a fuss, and that we're being ridiculous. It's not really that bad. So imagine if instead of hearing that, you were told, wow, like, yeah, I can see that that's really difficult for you. You know, would this cap that could block out some of that overhead light support you? can we make a change? Can we listen to you and make a change and turn out these lights? Like, you know, would that be helpful? Imagine like what that would do for a trusting relationship with a you know, a member of staff. Of course, you'll need to consider like what's safe and what's possible, but like individual adaptations can just be so helpful when we can't control all of the external environment. So noise cancelling headphones, sunglasses, blankets. So weighted blankets, a lot of people find helpful, but otherwise just having something like to wrap around. I do this a lot, like to wrap around, like so beneficial. Some hospitals allow it, some don't, but we really encourage it. Like blankets can create a sense of safety, but they're also like a barrier between me and the world. They also mean that I'm sitting on my blanket, and which the texture, I know, the smell is familiar, instead of this unknown, unfamiliar, uncomfortable seat texture. I don't know if you have ever sat on the hospital seating, but it's often a slightly peculiar infection control necessary wipe down kind of material. Like, you know, to support people to make a different choice, I think is a really lovely adjustment. So there is a host of other things. So stim toys as well, like having something to fiddle with can be really beneficial. Those like space hopper things or yoga balls, something that bounces and moves, can be really helpful for people who are more sensory seeking or like find that input beneficial. There is a ton of suggestions in the report, so I will point you in that direction again. The other thing I just want to mention, and Anne kind of touched on this earlier, is about kind of access to music and belongings. So often people aren't allowed phones or aren't allowed access to their own music. And so like there was a number of contributors to the report that said like having access to music would have given me so much control over my sensory input and it would have been really beneficial. Even if it's not on a phone, like even if it's a different device, that could be really helpful. But also access to like personal belongings and special interests. And including for me that would be access outside, and you know, being able to access outside space is so important for so many of us to get away from other people and the noise and the lights. If we can go to the next slide, and I think this is one for you, Charlie, to comment on regulation.
Yeah, I think regulation is such an integral part to managing sensory experience. You know, that could be physical stimming, it can be verbal stimming. For me, like Jill was kind of just saying, it was listening to music. And I wasn't allowed headphones, I wasn't allowed my phone. And it just meant that there was this constant sense of overwhelm, and I couldn't take that time to bring that sensory load down. Blanket bans of specific items because of certain behaviours, I think, are just really problematic. It means that we lose things that are such a big part of our sensory experience, or even just how we support ourselves. For me, even in my first week, they took my communication cards just because they were on a keyring. And that would have helped me talk to staff when I didn't know them well enough to feel like I could actively speak. And for me, even things like I wasn't allowed aerosol deodorant, but I don't like how roll-on feels as an autistic person. So that impacted how I felt about hygiene. And it's those small things that I imagine a lot of non-autistic people would never think about, but for me it was everything. And I think I would have engaged better in therapies and ultimately gotten home quicker if I'd had access to those items because I wasn't as anxious. And I picked up quite a lot of habits from others because I couldn't regulate in the healthy ways that I normally would at home. And as part of that masking and desperation to cope, I picked up these negative habits. And actually my unit, there were signs everywhere saying, if you pick up others' habits, you will get discharged. And for me, as much as I wanted to go home, I knew I wasn't ready to go home. So that threat was quite detrimental as well. I think, you know, we need to self-regulate or we will struggle to focus, we will struggle to stay calm, to talk, to sleep. It impacts every part of my life, and not having those items, even down to deodorant, was just a huge thing. I think the next slide is me as well, isn't it? Yeah. So I think this one probably seems a little bit random compared to some of the other topics, but it's something that I think is really important. Hypermobility spectrum disorders and Ehlers-Danlos syndromes are becoming more known to be extremely prevalent in autistic people, and many more may not have the disorders but will still experience benign hypermobility or lax joints. For me, inpatient caused a deterioration in my physical health. Living on 2 corridors, not using stairs, not going out, meant that once I left for 2 years, my legs constantly collapsed under me, and I struggled to walk even short distances without a walking stick. So it took a lot of physical therapy for me to get back to a normal, and I don't want to say normal state, because that disability doesn't mean not normal, but it meant that my mobility was extremely impaired. And the experience of chronic pain is actually a sensory experience that a lot of people don't understand, because it's something that sometimes it's all I can think about, and it's all that I can focus on, and that has a bearing on every element of my life. So to mitigate that, I think there needs to be a consideration of furniture, firm furniture, supportive, having a back to a chair, because we had a lot of like stools in our unit, especially in like the MDT room and things like that, where we'd have meetings. I would be sitting on this stool, like surrounded by official people trying to talk to me, and all I could think about was the fact that my back hurt. I know that exercise can be quite a contentious thing on wards because of disordered behaviours, but I think it's really important that mental health care doesn't come at the expense of physical health. So, you know, walks, yoga, just opportunities to move, I think are really important. So.
Thanks, Charlie. So this is our last slide, I think. And we've spoken a lot about environments, but also we want to comment on culture and approach, and how to make the space more predictable. So I have a quote from Dr. Damien Milton in my head. He says, it's like predictable environments are really important, but it can be predictably awful. So ideally we're moving we're moving away from that. But stuff that people have told us important is in the detail. So we had a comment about coming back on time. We said 10 minutes and it was 10 minutes. Very often, neurotypical people say, I'll be back in 2 minutes, and like 2 minutes passes, and then you're like, you're just waiting. Like, well, like what happens now? Are they ever coming back? Like, it's really confusing. So I would really like encourage you to say what you mean and to do what you say. So if you're not sure how long you're going to take, then say, I'm going to come back as soon as I can, or I'm not sure how long this is going to take, but I think it might be about 15 minutes. Or, you know, so like give people clearer, more accurate information, and assume that people will take you literally. Stuff around predictability, like, so people spoke a lot about ward rounds being really unpredictable, like, and causing an enormous amount of anxiety. So we know that ward rounds happen on a Tuesday, but I have no idea what time I'm going to be called. And so I know for me, like in this, like in that situation, actually, even with this presentation, I was saying, I called Anne earlier and I was saying I'm strangely a bit anxious about this presentation. And what that looks like for me is, for about the last week, I've been thinking on Thursday I've got a presentation, and everything that has come between then has been like really hard for me to engage with and process, because I've been thinking about this happening on Thursday. And this is a thing that I have decided I'm in control of. I'm really happy to be doing. Like, I can predict it. I know what time it's going to last. I know what I'm going to say. I have it all planned. But it really occupies, for me, a lot of space in my head. And so what happened last night was like, I was like, oh, I've got this presentation tomorrow. And then what happened all morning was that I was thinking at 2 o'clock, like, or at 1:30, I've got this presentation. And so I was able to put things into my day. So this morning I took my dog out for a walk in the woods, and I made sure that I had a lunch break, and I went out into the garden, and I picked some blackcurrants. And so I was able to put in the things that I know help me to regulate and to be calm. And I contacted Anne and got some reassurance, and I was like, okay, like, I know I can do this, it's okay. But imagine, like, for an autistic young person who's waiting for their ward round, and they might not want it. Like, this is going to depend on their treatment and their length of hospital stay, and perhaps like whether they get to visit home, or whether they're going to be heard, whether the thing that they want is going to happen. Like, they might be meeting someone they like or they don't like, or they don't know. Like, there's so much tied into that, and they don't know what time it's going to be. Like, it's yeah, just like the more we can do to give people clear and accurate information and to pin things down, like even if it's to say it will be between 10 and 12, or it will be, like the more information and control we can give people, the better. And a lot of this is about our practice. Like, this isn't all about environments. This is about us making adjustments instead of expecting people to adjust to systems. So a lot of people said, what I really would have found so helpful is if I had a timetable, like, so I knew what was going to happen, and when it was going to happen and what was expected of me. And that way I could plan, and I wouldn't have to think about it all. I wouldn't have to hold all of that information, because it would be there written down and I would have confidence in it. Whereas actually what a lot of people said, well, there was a timetable, but no one followed it. And so actually it caused more stress and more anxiety. So it really is like in the detail of what we tell people, what information, and keeping it really, really clear and predictable is so helpful for us. So a couple of other things that we've suggested. So Anne, do you know what, I didn't realise that I had any face blindness again until I met Anne, and Anne talked to me about face blindness and how a lot of autistic people are face blind and can't see faces or can't identify people from faces. And what we do is we rely a lot on the clothes people are wearing. So if people are in uniforms, that's really challenging. If people change their hair, that's really challenging. So having photos that is more than a headshot is really helpful. Having people in their own clothes is really helpful. Having clear identification badges, perhaps colour-coded by role, can be really helpful to us. So I was walking my dog with a friend, and she was like, wow, you're so friendly, you say hello to everyone, I'm really surprised. And I said to her, like, part of the reason that I say hello to everyone is because it's much easier to say hello to someone that I don't know than to ignore someone that I do know, but I don't know I'm ignoring them because I don't know if I know them or not. So now I go with this approach of like assuming that I know everyone. So we work out these kind of techniques to cover and to mask. But the more as a staff team, the more you can do to make it easy and predictable and clear for people and let them know who they're talking to, like, the better it's going to be. Yeah, so really important to the changes to the physical environment will make a big difference. There are so many tips and like really specific recommendations in the report that I think will be useful to you. Make the environments more predictable. So stuff that is unknown, unexpected can really throw us off track. So letting people know what's happening and when, and making it predictable is really, like, telling us when cleaning's happening. When is the bathroom going to smell the worst? Like, when is the noise from the Hoover going to be an issue? Like, the more information we can have about that, the better. Helping people to self-manage, like, often naturally we gravitate to spaces that work for us. We do stuff that works and we're discouraged, and kind of, people have other ideas about what our right behaviour should be. So supporting people to explore and to do what works for them is really, really helpful. And making suggestions where you notice things or have seen things working for other people. Yeah, and really thinking carefully about like how you work with and engage and support autistic children and young people, and particularly thinking about kind of the clarity of communication, I think can make an enormous difference. I'm gonna hand over to Charlie, just who I think has a really kind of powerful summary and kind of why should we listen and bother with this, Charlie? Can you sum up for us?
Yeah, I think for me, this report and its findings are huge. My inpatient admission was extremely traumatic. It still impacts me now. It's been 5 years and I don't see that going away. And I think if the findings of this paper are implemented, it will mean that we can get the care that we need without dealing with this extreme sensory overload, meltdowns, anxiety, making sure young people are looked at case by case rather than all as one group is massive. Making sure physical environments are accessible, calm, predictable. I just want no autistic person to experience the trauma that I did. You know, my admission wasn't really necessary to begin with, and that's a whole other discussion to be had. But for those who it may be necessary for, they really deserve a better sensory environment and a better experience.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Charlie. I think that's a really powerful place for us to end our presentation. So if I could ask us to stop sharing the slides. I'm going to pick up one question. So I did respond to this in the chat, and just while you have a think about if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. So if you have got any questions or comments, I will invite you to put them in the chat. Alternatively, if you want to raise a hand, I can hear from you directly. But there was a question a little bit earlier, and I apologise that I can't remember who it was from, but it was about lighting adjustments. And the question was along the lines of, will lighting adjustments, how does that cross over with other policy areas? And how can the risk of any adaptations be managed? And there is definitely, like across a lot of the recommendations that we make, there is definitely crossover with other policy areas. So for example, bedding, there is apparently an issue with fire regs and also infection control. So I think like it's important for us to understand what is the crossover, and then also to think about and how do we manage it. So taking the fire regs example, you know, we know presumably what the fire regulations are. So we can tell people you can bring your own bedding and it needs to have this picture on the label so that it meets fire regs. We might need to wash it before you use it. Like, would that meet everybody's requirements? Another alternative is that as a staff team, you invest in a range of high quality luxury bedding and give people options and choices about which bedding they would like to use on admission. So you've bought it, you know that it meets the regs, and they still get the kind of the choice and control. In terms of lighting, like most of the adaptations that we suggest are absolutely, and so we have studied in some detail the healthcare lighting policies. It's become something of a special interest of mine, and definitely I can tell you with confidence that it is possible to make adaptations that meets kind of safety regs. The question is, are we willing to do it? So, I mean, actually, the kind of the lighting policy suggests that we should be making decisions based on usability and the impact on the end user, and not based on kind of climate decisions as sole focus. It also says that we should be using warm lighting rather than cold white lighting in kind of more residential areas. It says that the lighting should kind of warm up slowly rather than come on very bright and very harsh. It encourages flexibility and control for the user. So I think there's a lot of stuff in the regulations that actually supports adaptations. I think the question is like, are our teams willing to work with us and engage to benefit you know, the people who are using, living in, supported in the services that we're talking about. So there's a bit of a sideways question. Is there anything else that anyone wants to ask around kind of any of the physical or environmental changes or anything like that we have suggested or recommended? I mean, and I'm interested as well if anyone's willing to say, like, does this resonate? Does this seem useful? Does it seem like a nonsense? How's it landing with you? Joanne, go on, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to type it all out. It was going to take me ages, but now you've just asked a specific question, so I thought I'll just come in. An observation really from having listened this afternoon, and I'm about halfway through the report, so I will finish it. But it must be so frustrating for you, and just thank you for the patience in outlining what is absolutely common sense. And I suppose the observation from me is that the adaptations you're asking for are things that everybody will use at certain points in their life. It's just that autistic people might need it more often every day. And actually, you know, if you sit in a busy office trying to concentrate on something, you probably do put your headphones in because everybody else is really annoying and you can't drown that out all the time. Or if you're hungover, the world suddenly feels a lot brighter and you will put your sunglasses on. And I think that there are things that everybody can probably relate to, just not every day. And that's the only difference here, is that actually the ask is for some of those really simple changes to be all the time. And you know, it's not that the report title is absolutely correct, isn't it? It's not rocket science at all. It's just finding ways that people relate to it enough that you can pick that up then very quickly and go with it. And I think the policy stuff is really important. There's health and safety, there's cost. There are always things like this when we're talking about particularly inpatient CAMHS that are additional barriers and challenges, I suppose, but not that some of this is not surmountable at all. So it was just an observation to say kind of thank you, and the frustration must be massive. So to keep going and to keep putting it forward in really clear ways that people can pick up and run with is just amazing. So thank you.
Awesome, thanks so much. That's great to hear, and thanks for your engagement and support. And I think Anna's been doing this a lot longer than me, so you know, but from my perspective, we're just delighted that we're being heard, and you know that we've got this engagement and support. And you know, thanks to Peter and his colleagues on the mental health task force for, you know, their insight and kind of support for us in the work, because it's you know, it's just great to have this kind of platform and reach and to be able to see people engaging with what we're suggesting. I think, was it Colin had a hand up? I saw someone else.
Yeah, I read the report. I think it was fantastic, and I do like the concept of neurodiversity, because there was a perception historically that Black people were incapable of having autism because of they didn't have brain functioning. Mm-hmm. And you read a lot of studies in America, it led to a lot of people being misdiagnosed and not having access to support services. And I'd just like to see the report be extended to look at issues around cultural diversity and autism, which is another big feature of the report. And it's also implicit in the White Paper and Mental Health Act that they should have organizational cultural competencies. So it's not only personal and individualized, but it recognizes cultural diversity in autism. And the services should be culturally sensitive. And also there's a linked correlation between misdiagnosis and restraints of Black communities as well, which is misread. And I think these are very important issues in terms of addressing race equality and mental health work.
Thanks, Colin. I imagine you saw me, and also like this is something that actually Anna's educated me on a lot, and I absolutely agree with everything you're saying. And thank you for saying it. So it hasn't had a great deal of attention, but someone's unmuted, but it's certainly something that we are very conscious of, and yeah, so thank you for bringing it to the meeting and putting it on the agenda. Is there anyone else who wanted to ask or say anything? Anne, did you want to comment?
I think there's a question that's come up in the chat as well about how we can make online meetings or online care reviews, etc., easier for autistic individuals. And that's a very good question, because as you can see here we are interacting, yippee. It does take an awful lot out of us. Of course, it takes an awful lot out of most people. An awful lot of people will be happier to go back to real life. It really helps to have good timekeeping. It really helps to have someone say, it's okay to turn your camera off if you need to. I'll always do that with autistic participants and say, you know, if you need to, that's fine. It's better to just structure breaks so that people have that breather, as we did today, and to finish on time. But the big thing is how we're enabled to interact. I had a very difficult meeting a few weeks back. I shall spare the blushes of the organisation, but it was one around inclusion. And they'd completely forgotten that some of us aren't always able to speak. I'm not always able to speak. You know, I save myself a big conference days. Other days it's more difficult. And so I will use chat. And someone said, oh, you can't use chat, sorry, but you know, we can't be looking at chat at the same time as this, you know. Oh, no, you will speak. And I went, oh dear. Now we're in difficulties. So we need to think, we need to reflect on how else people can join in if necessary. Really good shares. Blessed today with the people that we have. Thank you so much, Jill, especially for making sure we're on track and know what we're doing, knowing, being able to plan it, being able to contribute without everyone else speaking over us and without us doing the awkward thing of accidentally speaking over someone else. So that really clear, it's your turn, now it's your turn, now it's your turn. And that way, you know, a lot of the anxiety goes out of it. So that's just some top tips from me, if that helps.
Thanks, Anne. So a couple of things that I would add. So I arrange quite a few meetings, and the thing that I find really helpful is, and it helps me as kind of a meeting planner, is to say what are the aims of the meeting and to be absolutely explicit, like this is what I think this meeting is for. And then I let people know who's going to be attending. So all of that is very expected and predictable. And then I set the expectations for all attendees. So I'm expecting that all attendees will arrive on time, will have read this paper before they come, will be muted unless they're commenting, and to comment we will raise our virtual hands. So it's absolutely explicit. So a lot of this is, there's kind of, often there is implicit social rules that everybody is supposed to know, but we don't all know. And so as much as possible, I make the implicit explicit and say, this is what we're doing, this is what you can expect, and put it all out and share it in advance and let people know if you have a question or if you need anything, you can contact me in advance of the meeting. And it's hard to make time for that, and I'm conscious I have a meeting tomorrow that I haven't done that for, and you know, so it isn't always possible, but as far as possible, and especially in kind of meetings that are really significant for someone, I think that can really help them, and all of us actually, to kind of to know how we can engage and what's expected. And around predictability, so especially on meetings like this, like usually I'm like, don't really know quite how long slides are going to take and how it's going to run. And so I will say we will definitely break for 10 minutes before the hour is up. So even if I don't say an exact time, I will say we know that we are going to have a break within this time frame. And so it gives a sense of predictability, even if it isn't absolutely pinned down. So those are just a couple of things that I would add. So we do have a little bit of time left. I see there's been some comments and thanks in the chat, and people saying there's some quick wins. So just to add that there are many more quick wins in the report. So please do take a read. Peter, would you like to comment?
Yeah. Thanks, Jill. There are a number of comments just come through about the kind of quick and easy wins, and I think there's been a central message throughout the presentation that although there may be quick and easy wins, they make a really big difference. So it's just to remind colleagues that alongside the invitation to the event and the copy of the report, there were details on access to a funding opportunity to support implementation. You've done a fantastic presentation this afternoon, but I think, as you've said a number of times, Jill, there's an awful lot more in the report. It is a big report, but it's just to emphasise and make clear to colleagues there is a funding opportunity to support implementation. There's a time pressure on that for bids to be in by the end of July, but I think it's really important in terms of you know, seeing actual real changes based on the report that you've presented this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Peter. So a last call if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, I will just say this session will at some point be the recording will be shared on the NDTI website, so we really encourage you, if you found it useful, please do share it with your colleagues and friends and anyone that you can get to see it. We've certainly focused on CAMHS mental health inpatient services, but I do believe, and this has been put in the chat as well, that it's applicable across a range of environments. So please do share widely and let people know that they can take this learning into other locations. We have got a repeat session on the 21st. If you found this useful, please encourage your colleagues to come along. So watching online is great, but it is different, as you know, being in a session with other people and able to engage and ask questions. So please do encourage, if you've got colleagues from estates, if you have like ward staff who might be able to attend, or OTs, or allied healthcare professionals. If you found it useful, please do let other people know. Peter, is that a new hand or an old?
Yeah, it is a new hand, Jill. It's just to say, when we first set out talking about this work, we agreed that we're really keen to base it on the experience of young people, and I think that's come across really strongly this afternoon. So big thanks to Charlie and yourself on behalf of the Quality Improvement Task Force. It's been an excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. We've just had a question in the chat. Who's the best contact for the details of the meeting on the 21st? Is that you, Gabrielle?
Yeah, I'll share our team generic inbox in the chat, and then you can just email there.
Thank you.
Awesome. Great. And thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Thanks to Gabrielle and Peter and the team for hosting us and supporting us and making it all as easy as it has been. It's been great to see you all. If you have any subsequent questions that come up, either when you're reading the report or at a later date, please do get in touch with the team, and I'm sure they'll forward their enquiries onto me, or my details are on the NDTI website. And thanks so much to Anne and Charlie for holding your hand and supporting this. And we've had a request as well to reshare the link for the report. So again, you can find that on the NDTI website if you have a look there, but I'm sure we'll be able to send the link out as well. Okay, lovely. Right, well, you're all free to go. A little break before your next meeting. So thanks very much for attending and engaging. Cheerio.